Hello, boys and girls. I'm Lieutenant Verlon Rhodes with the Richland County Sheriff's Department. I'm going to read the book to you today. It's called Extra Yarn. And the author of this book is by Mac Barnett. On a cold afternoon in a cold little town where everywhere you looked was either the white of snow or the black of soot from chimneys, Annabelle found a box filled with yarn of every color. So she went home and knitted herself a sweater. And when Annabelle was done, she had some extra yarn. So she knitted a sweater for Mars too. That's her dog's name. But there was still extra yarn. And when Annabelle and Mars went for a walk, Nate pointed and laughed and said, "You two look ridiculous. You're just jealous," said Annabelle. "No, I'm not," said Nate. But it turned out he was. And even after she'd made a sweater for Nate and his dog and for herself and for Mars, she still had extra yarn. At school, Annabelle's classmates could not stop talking about her sweater. "Quiet," shouted Mr. Norman. "Quiet, everyone. Annabelle, that sweater of yours is terrible, and that sweater of yours is a distraction. I cannot teach with everyone turning around to look at you." "Then I'll knit one for everyone," Annabelle said, "so they won't have to turn around." "Impossible," said Mr. Norman. "You can't." But it turned out she could, and she did, even for Mr. Norman. And when she was done, Annabelle still had extra yarn. So she knit sweaters for her mom and dad, and for Mr. Pendleton, and Mrs. Pendleton, and for Dr. Palmer, and for little Louis. She made sweaters for everyone except Mr. Crabtree, who never wore sweaters or even long pants, and who would stand in his shorts with the snow up to his knees. "No sweater for me, thanks," said Mr. Crabtree. So she made Mr. Crabtree a hat. Even then, Annabelle still had extra yarn. She made sweaters for all the dogs and all the cats and other animals too. People thought soon Annabelle would run out of yarn, but it turned out she didn't. So Annabelle made sweaters for things that didn't even wear sweaters. She made sweaters for houses, for mailboxes. Things began to change in that little town. They all had sweaters. News spread of this remarkable girl who never ran out of yarn, and people came to visit from around the world to see all the sweaters and to shake Annabelle's hand. One day, an archduke, who was very fond of clothes, sailed across the sea and demanded to see Annabelle. "Little girl," said the archduke, "I would like to buy that miraculous box of yarn, and I'm willing to offer you $1 million. "No, thank you," said Annabelle, who was knitting a sweater for a pickup truck. The archduke's mustache twitched. $2 million, he said. Annabelle shook her head. "No, thanks." $10 million, shouted the archduke. "Take it or leave it." "Leave it," said Annabelle. "I won't sell the yarn." And she didn't. So he was a little bit upset. So that night, the archduke hired 3 robbers to break into Annabelle's house, and they stole the box and took it to the archduke, who set off across the snow and sailed across the sea. Back to his castle in a far, far land. The archduke put on his favorite song and sat in his best chair. Then he took out the box, and he lifted the lid, and he looked inside. His mustache quivered. He shivered. He trembled. The archduke hurled the box out the window and shouted, "Little girl, I curse you with my family's curse. You will never be happy again." So he threw the box out and into the water, and it's drifted, and it drifted in the lakes, and it drifted into the sea. And the box continued to drift until it come upon Annabelle. And it turned out she was happy again, because she once again had her box of yarn, had her box that had an endless yarn in it. And she once again began to make sweaters for anything and everything all throughout her community. Hope you've enjoyed this book called Extra Yarn by Mac Barnett. Thank you for listening.